Hi, I'm Dana, and today I wanted to make another video about the parents of autistic people, but this one's different. I've made ones in the past focusing on like autism mummies and the way that, like, personally as an autistic person I think that you should parent autistic children and things like that, but I've been working on myself and trying to like heal some trauma and like deal with my life, and it's had me thinking about my own parents a lot. But I don't feel like there's much of a conversation going on around like the parents of late diagnosed autistic people, and I think that it's an interesting conversation to be had because I've got quite a few friends and people that I know now that are late diagnosed autistics, and I feel like there's a sort of trend in that like we all have quite unique family situations, you know. And this is where we're getting straight into the video, not really having much of an intro, because the thing that I've noticed and that I can speak from experience about is that sometimes your parents are fucking weird, essentially. Sometimes your parents are odd. And personally, I'm someone who was consistently bullied for having weird parents. So growing up, my dad ran his own business eventually. When I was a very young child, he worked with social services, and I don't really know what he did, to be honest with you. I was very young. And then he started his own business doing what he was passionate about, which was Reiki and Hopi ear candling and hypnotherapy and a whole host of like general new age therapies and medicines. And him and my mum were both just real into like sort of like the alternative therapies. And you know, to children, this was when I was in primary school, to children they were fucking weird hippies essentially, only with a sort of like dark gothic edge. We were very much seen as like a strange family, and my mum was also like a childminder and later on worked in schools and the like, and other kids adored my mum, and it made it really awkward when like she was a dinner lady in my school and things, because other kids loved my mum but hated me. And as much as the kids loved my mum, the other parents didn't seem to be that big a fan of her. Like, I don't want to be shitty and mean, but like my mum didn't really have that many friends when I was growing up, and I definitely got a vibe at times from other parents that like they didn't like her, they didn't like our family, they didn't want to interact with us or have their kids interact with me, and it was a whole thing. And it's one of those things where I do think, like, not just from the fact that he was a bit odd, but from like a lot of things, I do think that my dad was autistic. I'm less sure about my mother because she's also a narcissist, but I'm fairly sure that my dad was autistic. And like, it's been a while since I looked into this, I won't lie. It was like right when I first got my diagnosis and I was like, is this a family thing or not? You know, like, chances are if you're autistic, someone else in your family is, and it's probably going to be someone real close, like one of your parents, if not both. Because quite frankly, autistic people sort of like swarm to each other, don't we? Like, I've only had 2 relationships and they were both with other autistic people. Most of my friends are autistic or at least neurodivergent in some way. Like, we find each other. Chances are at least one, if not both, of your parents are autistic if you're autistic. And if there's not diagnoses going on, and if it's not a stable, nice situation and things like that, it can cause a whole host of difficulties and issues within a family setting. For example, for me, one of these things was that I was already a weird, fat, disliked child, and then my parents were also considered to be really, really weird. So I got extra bullying, I got extra just bullshit for that, and it also honestly made me extra weird. You know, I had a certificate, like multiple certificates in how to hypnotise people and do Reiki as like a 9-year-old. Kids thought I was fucking weird, and I wouldn't have had that had my parents not normalised it and made it seem like it was just a completely normal, ordinary thing to teach your 9-year-old child how to do hypnotherapy. You know, they definitely made me weirder, just in general. Like, they made me weirder, like I was a weird kid because I was real into that kind of stuff. But it also obviously got me bullied for being really weird, and my parents were constantly like, well, you're better than them, they're jealous of you, things like that. And I was like, no, they're not. Like, they are not jealous of me. I don't even want to be me. They definitely don't. Like, it made things really difficult. You know, I quite often remember as a kid looking around at other people and being like, fuck, I wish I had their parents, I wish I had their mum, I wish I had this other set of family, because I'm out here trying real fucking hard at a certain point to be normal. You know, like, I think I was probably like 10 or 11 when I first sort of started to try to fit in and be like everyone else, and it sucked anyway. But it sucked doubly because my parents weren't trying to do that, my family weren't trying to do that. So even if I could build this sort of like vision and persona of myself as like a normal, good person, it all came tumbling down around me as soon as people met my parents or the rest of my family. Like when I first went to school in Denmark, there was quite a sort of buzz in the school, I guess, because they had an English person. So I was already perceived as being like kind of cool before they'd gotten to know me in any way. And I don't remember exactly what it was because it was in Danish. I didn't speak it at the time and barely speak it now. But my dad came to school with me and said something to the class and they all just started like howling with laughter. And I could just tell that like any perception of me being cool or interesting or whatever else was just gone from whatever my dad had done and said. And you know, I don't want to shit on my parents, but the way my dad dressed didn't help me any in school either. Like my dad was 6'8" and a generally very large guy, and then he'd show up in this fucking brown corduroy jacket with like the ugliest shirts that you've ever seen, with a completely clashing tie, with like a fuck off big tie pin. And it's like, as an adult, I can laugh at it and love it and be like, that was my dad, he was a kooky kind of guy, I like dressing weird too, I get it. But as a child coming to my school dressed like that, did you have to? Really? Didn't help me. But that's sort of like the more fun side of things. But as always, like when do I make a cheerful fucking video at this point? It traumatised me. Like I've talked about the fun bits and like the silly things and like, oh, my parents were quirky. But there were also a lot of other things, a lot of things that were like normalised with our family that I'm only just unpacking. And just a whole bunch of shit that was like very deeply traumatising that I frankly don't think would have happened if my parents either hadn't been autistic or had known they were autistic and were like not doing something about it or working on it, because like it's fine to be autistic, but you know, like I wouldn't choose to have a kid right now because I know my autistic traits would affect my ability to be able to parent the kid. My parents couldn't make that choice because they didn't know, so they just popped out a kid and boom, there I was, and their autistic traits definitely affected their, like at least my dad's autistic traits and whatever else or whatever instead was going on with him. I don't fucking know, he's dead now, we'll never find out if he was autistic. But you know, whatever was going on with him and my mum, and with him, I do think it was autism, massively like traumatised and affected me. You know, you can say that they did their best, and I'm sure they did, but it wasn't very fucking good. Like for me personally, one of the outstanding things that makes me think that my dad was autistic was that he had worked and pushed himself for a very, very long time and then started his own business. And when that started to fail during like the 2008 recession, those times, he was like, oh, it's all fucked, let's move to Denmark. And that was going to be our saving grace. That was the return to like his childhood. That was what, my dad was Danish, that's why we moved to Denmark. And in his mind, it was gonna be back home, you know, it was gonna be how it was when he'd moved away from Denmark 40, 50 years before that. So we get there and it's all different, it's all changed, and that threw him. Like even as an 11-year-old, because me and my dad moved over first when my mum was selling the house and dealing with my brothers. So yeah, I could tell straight away that like it was not what he expected it to be, it was not how he remembered it being, and it really fucking threw him. It had a really weird effect on him, and the person like that I'd grown up around and known as my dad definitely changed at that point a lot. Like he'd always had issues and various stages of like phases of depression and like. I think he had sort of always had the thought that something had stayed the same, you know, like you can go back, you can always go home. I think he'd maintained that thought like right from when he first moved to the UK of like, if it all falls to shit, you can always go back and it'll be the same. And then it all fell to shit and we went back and it was not the same. And that was the beginning of what my family recognised as my dad falling apart and being a shit father, and what I think was autistic burnout, because he'd tried to set up this business and he'd tried and he'd worked and he'd worked and he'd put all this effort in and nothing had ever quite worked out, you know. And anyone can only push themselves so far in that situation, regardless of being autistic or not. But especially for an autistic person like I believe he was, that was a major catalyst. And this is where I got a very misconstrued view of what depression is, because I was constantly told like, your dad's depressed, you can't help it, your dad's depressed, it's depression, it's not your dad's fault, it's depression. And fair enough, it wasn't his fault. I don't think it was depression, I think it was burnout, because for the next 7 years my dad sat in his study And like, we moved multiple times throughout this time, and he'd make sure that he had a study, and he would sit in his study and he would drink the cheapest Diet Coke you can find and these like really specific pastries and biscuits, which were clearly fucking safe foods. And he would play mahjong, like the little tile clicky game on the computer, all day, every day, for years. Me and my mum would go in and be like, we're gonna go out here, we're gonna go do this, this is gonna happen, this is, you know, the plan for the day, to have a nice family day out. And he'd be like, okay, see you later. And we'd be like, family day out, you're not coming? And he'd be like, no, I'm playing mahjong, you know? And it's one of those things where, like, as a child and a teenager, it deeply upset and frustrated me. And as an adult who has spent hours and hours playing Minecraft or Skyrim or Sims, while knowing full well I need to get up and do this thing, I need to do this thing, and it just doesn't fucking happen, you know? Like, there's things like that I can very much recognise in my dad and be like, yo, this traumatised me, this like deeply damaged me as a child. Like, I had several years where my dad paid no attention to me and didn't want to participate in family life with me at all, and literally did nothing, you know? But I also totally fucking get it, and it's that honestly kind of a massive motivator to me to not do the same. Like, if he hadn't done it, maybe I would be, you know? Sorry, someone came to fix me oven, but I'm back for the roundup of the video. I got most of my main points out. I just wanted to do a sort of little wrap-up part. For a lot of us, we're never going to know for sure whether or not our parents are also autistic. We've just got to get on with things and deal with it. But for me, I definitely find it useful to just be like, I know how I feel about my parents and what I think about them and about their diagnoses and how they may have been. And regardless of what it may be, if I can look at things that they did or ways that they behaved and like take something from that to try to better myself or be a better person or live a better life or whatever else, like, that's sort of the point of your parents, isn't it? It's that you don't have to make as many mistakes and there's someone there to like help you learn and to look after you and the shit. And they didn't look after me, but at least I can learn from their mistakes, eh? How I feel about my dad's a bit weird and confused because we're moving on to like 8 years since he died, so like I've not had him here for like the majority of my adult life, you know? And as you'll know if you've watched any of my other videos, I don't speak to my mother, fully cut that shit off. It was a bad time to have any sort of relationship with my mother. But whether we like our parents or not, whether they're around us or not, like, if they raise you, like, which is what your parents are, like, I know I'm very, like, my mum and dad, whoever raised you as your parents, like, unless it's, like, your grand, you know what I mean. Like, we always pick things up from the people who raised us, the people that we spent the most of our time around, the people that we're trying to, like, impart their thoughts and opinions and how they think we should be people, kind of thing. We're gonna pick shit up from them, and for me, that was my parents. So the best I can do is look at the parts of them that I don't want, you know? Like, it's all very well to look at, like, people that I like and be like, I want to be like that and I want to be like this. Sometimes it's way more beneficial to be able to look at someone and be like, I don't want to be like that. Yeah, I think that's the video. I think that's all that I wanted to say. I think we've done it, guys. So, as always, if you wanted to subscribe, that would be lovely. If you wanted to be a patron or a YouTube member, that'd also be very, very nice. You can donate to me on Ko-fi, and you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all of those fun places. I make videos every Thursday and Sunday. Hi!
You were holding, fuck, sorry.
Right at the end, I was about to say my last word.
Sorry, guys! Do you want a cuppa?
Yes, please.
Yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
It's alright.
So whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year, and I will see you again in a few days.